either hopeful for or bracing for immense change right now. And I come back again to some of the conversations that I had during the election cycle in late October as I was on the road, mostly in North Carolina. And I would talk to families that described to me feeling like year after year or cycle after cycle, whether they were in urban parts of the state or rural ones, like their lives were not changing, that they were seeing this dysfunction on our sort of national political stage, and they wanted change. And I think one of the reasons we're in the moment that we're in and that people were fueling a comeback for President-elect Trump is that, in a way, that represented a type of change, a release from a status quo that it seems large numbers of Americans, actually no matter what side of the divide they're on, they wanted broken in some sense. And so that's the thing I think we need to recognize. But the pieces that I see on the ground and at the local level that seem to respond to or heal from that are local community groups and organizations that are starting to bring people together across those differences and have them spend that quality time. I did a story about a pickup basketball league in New York City the other day, where investment bankers, artists, people between employment were all on a team together, never talking about politics, never talking about the difference between Staten Island and the Bronx, but we're just talking about their love of Caitlin Clark and the WNBA and their place in the world. And I think people want more of that.
Yeah, Dr. Moore, pick up on that point, and also just the responsibility that you think, as a faith leader, you think leaders should have morally, whether they're in the White House or in the halls of Congress or at the community level, as Antonia's talking about.
Well, what I worry about right now is cynicism. People who have given up, and the assumption that my enemies are as corrupt as they can possibly be, therefore I need to be just as corrupt in order to fight them. And so I think there's a sense of exhaustion and cynicism that we have to combat. And I think in terms of moral leadership in office, a lot of that has to do with imaginatively giving people a picture of what is possible. Growing up in Mississippi, when I would see elderly white people who had resisted the pull to Jim Crow segregation ideology, it was almost always for one reason. They were in the Air Force. They were in the Army. They had seen a different picture of reality and were able to bring that back home. I think our leaders can't underestimate how many children are watching and saying, what does this really mean? And can rhetoric, can language even mean anything at all? Or is it simply this constant upping of the stakes? Which, as a Christian, I think of Jesus saying, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. That kind of cycle of violence, whether rhetorical or actual, leads to nowhere good.
Well, you take me to my question for Doris beautifully, which is we are about to, of course, hear from President-elect Trump at his inauguration, his inaugural address. And you talk about the importance of language and rhetoric in these moments where everyone is watching, Doris. What does history tell us about this moment?
I mean, I think history would point out exactly what you said about imaginatively giving people a different way of thinking. FDR's first inaugural, I think, was perhaps the most impactful. He was told right before he went there that, you know, if your program works, you'll be one of the great presidents in history. If it fails, you'll be one of the worst. He said, no, I'll be the last American president. That's how hard it was. 1 out of 4 people out of work, people feeling paralyzed, no safety net. And he comes on and he says with this contagious optimism, you know, only a foolish optimist would deny the brutal realities of the moment. But there's nothing to fear but fear itself. But most importantly, he said, it's not your fault, people. It was the failure of leadership, and I'm here to provide that leadership. And then he promised action. I'll bring an emergency session of Congress. I'll get these laws passed. If they won't, I'll somehow act as if I'm at war. By the end of that talk, people felt change. They felt they had a leader. There were headlines. We have a leader. The government still lives. Hundreds of thousands of letters went in. One person wrote, my roof fell off. My wife is mad at me. I've lost my job. Everything's bad except you're there. Now everything's all right. Wow. It's the mystery of leadership that can happen. Now, it may not happen at the top, but we have to believe, as you say, we cannot have cynicism. All the big changes that have happened in America come from the ground up. It was when Lincoln was told you're a liberator, he said, no, it was the anti-slavery movement that did it all. It was the civil rights movement, the women's movement. We have to believe, if we're not able to think that we can have a leader that can help us out of it, have to believe in ourselves as citizens.
We only have about 30 seconds left, Antonio, really quickly. Will the younger generation be listening?
I think we have to meet them where they are. They want to learn. They want to listen. I've started asking them on the road when I meet them, what could I do to better serve you? And they tell me, start from the beginning. You need to explain to me the terms of the debate because I feel like it's running away from me. Come to the platforms where we live and the neighborhoods where we are. And that's going to be the beginning of change.
Dr. Moore, we have about 20 seconds left. Your final thought.
I think politics makes a good way to run a country together. It makes a terrible God. We have to have things more important than our political struggles if we're going to make it together as a country.
All right. Thank you for